I could hear the rain hammering against my windshield, each drop like the ticking of a clock, counting down to the moment I finally lost control. My hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles had turned white, and my heart pounded in my chest like it wanted out. The storm had rolled into Austin without warning, turning the highway into a blur of headlights and water. My tires skidded as I tried to brake, and for a split second I thought this was it. I'd fought so hard to get here. This couldn't be how it ended. But as my car swerved dangerously close to the guardrail, all I could think about was them, my parents, their disappointed stares, their words that cut deeper than any storm. Olivia deserves it more. The phrase echoed louder than the thunder. I was on my own in this storm, just like I'd been all along. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. They say families are supposed to be your safe place. The people who see you, believe in you, and lift you when you stumble. For me, family meant always coming in second, always being the daughter they almost forgot to mention. My name is Sophia Carter, and this is the story of how I learned to stop chasing the approval that was never mine to begin with, and what it cost me to get there. From the outside, the Carters look like a classic American family living the dream in suburban Austin. We had the two-story brick house with white trim, the perfectly mowed lawn, and the holiday wreaths my mom hung up every year like clockwork. Michael Carter, my dad, was a respected accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. He liked things neat, predictable, and profitable. Susan Carter, my mom, was a high school English teacher with a passion for Shakespeare and a gift for pretending everything was fine. And then there was Olivia, my younger sister, the golden child. Olivia was born 2 years after me, but somehow always seemed miles ahead. She had this natural charm that drew people to her. Blonde waves, bright blue eyes, a laugh that made adults melt. From the time she could talk, she had a way of saying just what people wanted to hear. I don't blame her for it. Not really. But from the start, I could feel how much easier it was for our parents to love her. I was the quieter one, the girl with tangled brown hair who liked numbers more than words, who got lost in notebooks filled with business ideas and little charts I drew for fun. I wasn't flashy, I didn't sparkle, and in my family, that meant I was easy to overlook. I remember Christmases where Olivia's pile of gifts towered over mine, the latest gadgets, the sparkly dresses, the art kits she'd get bored of in a week. I'd unwrap socks, practical sweaters, maybe a discount craft kit if I was lucky. And every year, Mom would smile and say the same thing when she saw the look on my face. Your sister's gifts are to encourage her talents, sweetheart. You understand, don't you? At school, it was no different. When Olivia had debate tournaments, my parents took off work, traveled for competitions, threw parties when she won. When I placed first in the regional business plan competition, Dad barely looked up from his phone. That's nice, Sophia. Hey, did you help Olivia with her science project yet? But I wasn't angry. Not at first. I thought if I just worked harder, they'd see me. If I racked up the awards, if I showed them how serious I was about my future, they'd finally say, "We're proud of you." By high school, I was juggling school, clubs, and a job at a local bakery. I saved every penny, knowing deep down I'd need it someday. Meanwhile, Olivia breezed through her classes, dazzling everyone in debate and student government. Then came senior year, the year everything cracked wide open. Olivia and I both applied to Westlake University, one of the top schools in Texas. I pored over my applications at night after shifts at the bakery, perfecting every essay. The day the acceptance letters arrived, I could barely breathe. We both got in. Both of us. I remember announcing my acceptance at dinner, voice trembling with excitement. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of pride in Dad's eyes. But before I could be sure, Olivia burst through the door waving her letter. And just like that, the room shifted. Dad jumped from his seat. Mom pulled out the sparkling cider. The night became Olivia's celebration, as if I'd never spoken at all. But the real blow came 2 weeks later, during a family dinner I'll never forget. The one where Dad folded his hands and said calmly, "We've decided to put the college fund toward Olivia's tuition. It's the smart investment. She's always been the one more likely to succeed in a traditional path." The smart investment! Like I was some risky stock not worth the gamble. Mom tried to soften it, said I was independent, that I could handle loans, maybe community college first. And then Dad said it. The line that stayed with me through every sleepless night after: Olivia deserves it more. That was the night I stopped trying to earn their approval, and the night I decided no matter what it took, I would make it on my own. What they didn't know was that I'd already been preparing for this. The late nights at the bakery, the scholarships I'd applied for in secret, the plan I'd mapped out in my notebooks. Just in case. The storm I drove through that night, the one that nearly sent me off the road, felt like the perfect mirror for my life. Unpredictable, dangerous. But somehow I kept going. I drove to Grandma Evelyn's house that night, 2 hours away, the only person who'd ever really seen me. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. Just wrapped me in a hug and said, "Let it out, baby girl. I'm here." And I did. Every tear I'd held back, every word I'd bitten down for years, I let it all pour out like the storm outside. That night, sitting in her warm kitchen with the rain pounding the roof, I made myself a promise. I'd go to Westlake, I'd find a way, and I'd show them, show myself, that I was worth the investment they never made. I didn't know then just how hard that promise would be to keep, or how much it would change me. The storm had passed by morning, but inside me it still raged. I sat at Grandma Evelyn's kitchen table, staring at the mug of tea she'd made me, the steam curling up like fragile hopes I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Outside, Lake Travis gleamed under a pale sun, the water calm and steady, everything I wasn't. I hadn't slept. Not really. My mind had replayed the dinner with my parents over and over, the words, "Olivia deserves it more," cutting deeper each time. I kept wondering if I'd imagined it, if maybe I'd heard them wrong. But no, the truth was right there, clear as the sunrise. Grandma sat across from me, her hands folded over mine. Her skin was soft and worn, like pages of an old book that had seen too much, but refused to fall apart. "You're not going to let them decide who you are," she said quietly. "You're too strong for that." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But my chest felt hollow, like their words had scooped everything good out of me. On the drive home to Austin that afternoon, I gripped the steering wheel hard, not because of the lingering rain, but because I was trying to hold myself together. I didn't have time to fall apart. If they weren't going to invest in me, I'd have to invest in myself. School felt different after that night. Like everything was sharper, more urgent. I threw myself into my part-time job at the bakery, taking extra shifts whenever I could. The early mornings didn't bother me as much anymore. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, and every dollar I saved felt like a small victory. At school, I kept my head down, focused on grades, on clubs that would look good on scholarship applications. Business club, math team, the junior entrepreneurship program that met twice a week after school. I joined them all. I didn't care that my friends thought I was overloading myself. I didn't have a choice. Olivia, meanwhile, floated through senior year like she was already living the dream. Debate victories, student council meetings, weekend trips with her friends. Mom and Dad were there for every win. Front row at every performance, camera in hand, smiles wide. Me? I worked late, came home to find leftovers in the fridge and polite notes from Mom. "Hope your shift went well. Don't forget to help Olivia with her history paper." I did help her. Of course I did, because despite everything, she was my sister. But in the quiet moments, when the house was dark and everyone else was asleep, I'd sit on my bedroom floor and sketch out plans, business ideas, budget breakdowns, scholarship deadlines, dreams I couldn't tell anyone about because I knew they wouldn't listen. When acceptance letters came from Westlake, I didn't cry tears of joy like I'd imagined I would. I felt relief. Like maybe, just maybe, I'd finally earned my way to a future they couldn't take from me. The day the letters arrived, I waited until dinner to say anything. My hands were shaking as I slid the envelope across the table to Dad. "I got in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced at the letter, smiled briefly. "That's great, Soph, really great." Before I could respond, Olivia came bursting through the door, waving her own letter, practically glowing. "Me too, I got into Westlake." And just like that, my moment was over. The house filled with cheers, sparkling cider, a surprise cake Mom had somehow hidden. I stood there, invisible, watching as they toasted to Olivia's success. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I felt numb. In the weeks that followed, I spent every spare second filling out scholarship applications. Late nights after work, lunch breaks at school, I applied for everything I could find, from national contests to tiny local grants that no one else seemed to know about. Mrs. Patel, my counselor, stayed late more times than I could count to help me. She had this quiet way about her, like she saw more than she let on. "You're one of the most determined students I've ever met," she told me one afternoon as we sealed yet another envelope. I clung to that, because if she saw it, maybe it was real. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad were deep in planning mode for Olivia's college future. Campus visits, dorm decor, laptops, clothes, even a car they said she'd need for commuting. I started selling things I didn't need, my old guitar, the jewelry I never wore. I set up a savings jar and watched the small bills and coins pile up. I also started waking up earlier, adding a paper route before school. It was exhausting, but every paycheck brought me closer to my goal. One night, I overheard Mom on the phone with a friend. "We're just so proud of Olivia. She's gonna do amazing things. Sophia, oh, she's figuring things out. She's always been resourceful." Resourceful? That was the word they used when they didn't want to admit they'd given up on me. Grandma Evelyn called every Sunday. She always asked how my plans were going, how I was holding up. I'd tell her the truth, the parts I could say out loud anyway. She'd remind me, "Baby girl, they can't see what I see." But that doesn't mean it's not there. Senior year blurred by in a rush of work, school, and applications. I was tired all the time, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. By spring, I'd pieced together enough scholarships, grants, and loans to cover my first year. Barely. When I told Mom and Dad, they nodded. Like that's what they'd expected all along. Like it wasn't strange that their oldest daughter had to fund her future while they planned a party for the younger one. I let it go. What choice did I have? Graduation was coming, a new chapter, a chance to prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that I was worth believing in. What I didn't know was that the hardest part hadn't even started yet. That came next. When I stepped onto campus, alone, with nothing but determination to keep me going. And no one, not even me, was ready for what would come after that. The night of the dinner that changed everything still plays in my head like a scene from a bad movie. I can smell the roasted chicken Mom made, the way she always did on special occasions. I can hear the clink of Dad's fork against his plate, the nervous way he cleared his throat before dropping the bomb. We sat around the table, just the four of us. The air was thick with unspoken tension, at least for me. Olivia chatted about her latest debate win, and Mom hung on every word. Dad nodded approvingly, proud as ever. I waited. I waited for them to say something to me. About my scholarship news, about how hard I'd been working, about anything. Instead, Dad folded his hands like he was about to deliver a business proposal. "Your mom and I have been talking," he said, looking mostly at Olivia. "And we've made a decision about college funding." I felt my stomach tighten. I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. "We've decided to use the college savings for Olivia's tuition at Westlake," he continued. "It makes the most sense. We've always seen her as the one best suited for that investment. You know, the safe bet." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I looked at him, then at Mom, waiting for someone to say this was a joke, waiting for someone to see me. Mom's smile was soft, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sophia, sweetheart, you're so independent. You've always found a way. We're sure you'll figure this out too." And then came the final blow. The words that would replay in my mind through sleepless nights, through 5 a.m. shifts, through every rejection and every success that came after. "Olivia deserves it more." Just like that. As if my worth could be measured, weighed, and found lacking. I don't remember much else from that dinner. I remember my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear their voices. I remember pushing my food around my plate, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I remember Olivia looking down at her hands, not saying a word. Afterward, I went upstairs to my room, locked the door, and sank to the floor. For hours, I sat there in the dark, staring at nothing. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the soft creak of the old floorboards. I thought about everything I'd done to get here: the bakery shifts, the scholarships, the sleepless nights. And for what? At some point, I must have fallen asleep right there on the floor, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was creeping through the blinds. The next morning, I found Mom in the kitchen, stirring her coffee. I stood there, my hands shaking, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you have saved for Olivia and not for me?" She sighed, as if this was just another chore she had to get through before work. "Sophia, it wasn't personal. We had to be practical. We had limited resources, and Olivia's always been more focused on academics. You've got your business ideas, your jobs. You'll be fine." I wanted to scream, to make her see. "I have better grades than Olivia. I've worked 2 jobs. I've earned this." Dad walked in just then, folding his newspaper. "Your sister's always been dedicated. You've been distracted, and Olivia's career path is clear. Your ideas are risky." Risky. That's what they called my dreams. I left the house that day and drove straight to Grandma Evelyn's. The drive felt longer than usual. Every mile weighted with disappointment. When I got there, she opened the door and pulled me into a hug before I could say a word. We sat on her porch, looking out over Lake Travis, the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. I told her everything: the dinner, the words, the hurt. She listened, quiet and steady, holding my hand. When I was done, she wiped my tears and said, "Sometimes, Sophia, the hardest moments make us who we're meant to be. You have something they don't see: your fire, your determination. Don't let them dim it." Her words lit a spark in me. That night, I made a plan. I stayed up in the guest room with my laptop and notebook, mapping out every scholarship I hadn't applied for yet, every loan option, every work-study opportunity. I made lists, budgets, timelines. I wasn't going to let them stop me. When I got back to Austin, the atmosphere at home felt colder, or maybe I was just seeing it for what it really was. Olivia tried to talk to me once late at night, knocking softly on my door. "I didn't know they were going to say that," she said, her voice small. "I'm sorry." I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault. I wanted to believe she meant it, but the words caught in my throat. I just nodded and she went back to her room. The rest of the school year passed in a blur of work and applications. I woke up at 4 some mornings to squeeze in study time before my bakery shift. I stayed late at school to use the computer lab for scholarship forms. Mrs. Patel noticed. She pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Sophia, you don't have to do this alone. There are people who want to help." I nodded, but inside I knew it was on me. It always had been. By graduation, I had cobbled together enough funding to cover my first year at Westlake, just barely. Olivia's graduation party was lavish. Balloons, catered food, relatives I hadn't seen in years. Mine were quieter. Mom offered to let me use her old twin sheets for my dorm. That was it. Move-in day came. My parents loaded Olivia's new SUV with her brand new laptop, clothes, dorm decorations. I packed my thrift store suitcases into my old Honda, the one that needed new brakes and smelled faintly of mildew. At Westlake, they hugged Olivia tight, helped her set up her room, posed for pictures. I parked across town in a cheap apartment with 3 strangers and carried my boxes up the stairs alone. But standing there in that tiny room, sweaty and exhausted, I felt something I hadn't expected: freedom. This was my shot, my clean slate. No more waiting for them to see me. From here on out, I'd see myself. And that would have to be enough. The first night in my new apartment felt lonelier than I imagined. I lay on a thin mattress on the floor, staring up at the cracked ceiling, listening to muffled voices of my roommates arguing about chores and the faint thump of bass from the neighbor's stereo. The room smelled faintly of old paint and mildew, but I didn't care. I was too exhausted to care. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but my mind kept racing. Tomorrow was the start of it all: my classes, my new job at the campus coffee shop, my fight to make this work. There was no backup plan, no safety net. It was just me. Morning came too fast. I woke to the sound of the city outside, buses rumbling past, someone yelling down the street, the clatter of a trash truck. The sunlight through my cheap blinds hurt my eyes, but I forced myself up. This was the life I'd chosen. Or maybe the one I'd been forced into. Either way, I wasn't going to fail. My first stop was the coffee shop. It was small, tucked into the corner of a busy street near campus. The kind of place that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon, with scuffed floors and a menu board that hadn't been updated in years. The manager, a tired looking guy named Pete, handed me an apron that smelled like stale milk and showed me how to work the register. "You're gonna need thick skin here," he warned. "Mornings are brutal. Students, professors, locals, they're all in bad moods until they get their coffee." I smiled, nodded, and got to work. By noon, my feet ached, my head pounded, and I'd spilled coffee on my only decent pair of jeans. But I made it through. Classes started that afternoon. I rushed from work to campus, weaving through crowds of students who looked so carefree, so sure of themselves. I felt like an outsider in my own life. But as I sat in my first business class, listening to the professor talk about resource management, I felt a flicker of hope. This was where I belonged. I understood what he meant about stretching a dollar, about making something out of nothing. I was living it. Every day after that followed a rhythm. Up at 5, open the coffee shop, run to class, study during lunch breaks, back to work for an evening shift at a bookstore I picked up to cover rent, home late to do homework, then collapse for a few hours of sleep. It was grueling. My roommates thought I was crazy. They partied, stayed out late, lived the college life I couldn't afford. Rachel, though, was different. She noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way I skipped meals to save money. One night, she left a plate of food outside my door. "Eat," was all the note said. I stared at it for a long time before finally picking it up. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in weeks. As the semester wore on, I got better at balancing everything. I mapped out my time in color-coded planners, set alarms for study blocks, learned to read chapters while standing in line at work. Every minute mattered. Meanwhile, Olivia's updates filtered through in texts or calls to mom and dad that I overheard when I managed to visit home. Sorority events, trips, weekends home for mom's cooking. She seemed to be thriving, exactly as they'd hoped. I didn't resent her, not anymore. But I envied the ease of it all for her, the safety of knowing someone had her back. One afternoon, after a brutal midterm week, I sat alone on campus, staring at the skyline beyond the business building. My phone buzzed. Grandma Evelyn. I answered, and the sound of her voice calmed me instantly. "I'm proud of you, Sophia," she said. "You're doing it. You're making your way." "I'm tired, Grandma," I admitted, my throat tightening. "I know, baby. But diamonds are made under pressure. Remember that." I held on to those words as the months passed. Then came winter. The coffee shop cut hours to save costs. My carefully balanced budget collapsed overnight. I stared at my bank account in shock, realizing I couldn't cover rent. Desperation clawed at me. I applied for every on-campus job I could find, stayed up late revising scholarship essays, begged for extra shifts at the bookstore. That's when I met Dr. Ramirez. She taught my business ethics class, and one day, after I stayed behind to ask a question, she asked me to stay longer. "Your insights during discussion are impressive," she said. "Have you ever considered research work?" I shook my head, too stunned to speak. "I could use an assistant," she continued. "The pay isn't bad and the hours are flexible." It felt like a lifeline. I accepted on the spot. The work was challenging: data analysis, reading studies, helping organize presentations. But it paid better than either of my other jobs, and it made me feel like I was building something that mattered. Around the same time, a new idea began to take shape: a service for small local businesses. Virtual assistant tasks they didn't have time for: scheduling, email management, social media. I tested it with one of Dr. Ramirez's contacts, and to my surprise, they loved it. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was ahead of the storm instead of drowning in it. But I knew better than to get comfortable. College was a marathon, and I was only at mile 3. I had no idea that the hardest tests weren't the ones in my textbooks, but the ones life was about to throw at me next. Spring semester started with a burst of hope. The research job with Dr. Ramirez steadied my finances enough that I could drop one of my shifts at the bookstore. For the first time since starting college, I allowed myself to breathe. Just a little. My business classes felt different now, too. When professors talked about resilience, resource management, or scaling a startup, I wasn't just imagining it. I was living it. Every theory had a reflection in my day-to-day struggles. But if I thought the storm had passed, I was wrong. It started with small things: headaches that wouldn't go away, a heaviness in my chest that I tried to ignore, constant fatigue that even coffee couldn't fix. I kept pushing through because that's what I'd always done, because resting felt like failure, because stopping wasn't an option. Then came the day my body decided it had had enough. It was a Tuesday morning, just after dawn. I'd stayed up late finishing a paper for my business law class, and my alarm jolted me out of a restless sleep. I remember sitting up, the room spinning around me. My heart raced like I'd run a marathon, and my hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I don't remember much after that, just flashes. Rachel's panicked voice calling my name, the siren of the ambulance, the ceiling of the ER, sterile and too bright. When I came to fully, Rachel was sitting beside the hospital bed, dark circles under her eyes, worry etched across her face. "You scared the hell out of me, Sophia," she said, her voice shaking. The doctor came in soon after. Dehydration, exhaustion, malnutrition, the trifecta of burnout. "You need to slow down," he said firmly. "Your body can't keep this pace forever. If you don't take care of yourself, next time might be worse." I nodded, but inside, panic bloomed. Slow down? How? I had rent, tuition, bills, dreams, responsibilities no one else was going to carry for me. Rachel didn't say much as she drove me home, but later that night she knocked on my door. When I opened it, she held out a plate of food. "From now on, I'm making enough for both of us. No arguments." I stared at her, gratitude catching in my throat, and she didn't stop there. Rachel became my fiercest protector. She'd shoo our other roommates away when I needed to study. She made sure I ate, even if it meant leaving little containers labeled with my name in the fridge. She listened when I vented, quietly without judgment. In her, I found something I hadn't expected: a chosen family. Grandma Evelyn, too, became a constant source of strength. Her letters came weekly now, handwritten, full of encouragement, sometimes with little clippings from newspapers or pages torn from books she thought would inspire me. One letter stood out. "Sophia, my brave girl," she wrote. "You remind me so much of myself at your age. I see you struggling, but I also see you shining. Please remember, diamonds don't just survive pressure, they're formed by it." Her words stayed with me on the hardest days. I started to make small changes. I said no to extra shifts when I could. I let myself sleep an extra hour on weekends. I accepted Rachel's help, and I didn't feel guilty about it. Meanwhile, my small business idea slowly gained traction. A local shop owner, Dr. Ramirez, had connected me with Spread the Word, and soon I had 2 clients, then 3. It wasn't enough to quit my jobs. Not yet, but it was a start. I learned to balance the chaos better. I kept my planner close, color-coded every hour of every day. I studied during bus rides, listened to lecture recordings while folding laundry, drafted emails to clients during breaks at work. What surprised me most was that, despite everything, I was excelling. My grades stayed high. My professors started noticing me, not just as another student, but as someone who had something to say, someone worth listening to. One afternoon, Dr. Ramirez pulled me aside after class. "I've been watching your progress, Sophia," she said. "Not just in class, but how you handle yourself. Have you thought about entering the National Business Innovation Competition?" I blinked, caught off guard. "You have a real shot," she continued. "Your business model is smart, grounded, and you're living it, which gives you a perspective others don't have." The idea terrified me, but it also lit a fire inside me. For the first time, I wasn't just trying to survive. I was starting to think about what it would mean to thrive. Still, the weight of everything pressed on me. There were days I doubted myself, days I wondered if it was worth it. Those were the days I'd walk down to the lake near campus after class, sit on the bench, and let myself breathe. I'd think about Grandma Evelyn, about Rachel's quiet acts of kindness, about how far I'd come since that awful dinner table conversation. And I'd remind myself, I wasn't doing this for them. Not anymore. I was doing this for me. What I didn't know then was that the storm hadn't passed. It was just gathering strength. And soon it would test everything I thought I'd learned. The weeks after my hospital scare felt like walking a tightrope. I was trying to balance everything: classes, jobs, my tiny business, my health, without falling again. I kept hearing the doctor's warning in my head. If you don't slow down, next time might be worse. But slowing down didn't feel like an option. Rent still came due every month. Tuition payments loomed. My clients needed their emails answered, their schedules managed, their social media posts lined up. I had no room to slip. I tried to work smarter. I focused more on the business, cutting back on extra shifts at the coffee shop. My tiny company was still small, just 3 steady clients, but it paid better than either of my campus jobs. I stayed up late, building a simple website, polishing service packages, studying competitors. Dr. Ramirez kept encouraging me. She'd drop little hints in class or after meetings. Think bigger, Sophia. You're onto something. And for a while, it worked. My days were packed, but manageable. I even let myself hope. Then, one rainy Monday, everything started to unravel again. I'd just finished a long shift at the coffee shop, one I'd picked up as a favor, even though I knew better. When I checked my email on the bus home, there it was, a message from one of my main clients. Sophia, we're really sorry, but we have to pause services for now. Budget cuts. My stomach sank. That client made up nearly half of my business income. I felt the familiar panic rise. When I got home, I sat at my tiny desk, staring at my budget spreadsheet. Without that client, I couldn't cover rent next month. I couldn't make my next tuition payment. For a few minutes, I let myself feel it. The fear, the frustration, the exhaustion. I buried my face in my hands and let out a shaky breath. But I didn't stay down for long. I couldn't afford to. That night I emailed Dr. Ramirez. I told her the truth, that I was struggling, that I needed guidance. She replied within an hour, "Come see me tomorrow. We'll figure something out." The next afternoon, I sat across from her in her office, hands clenched in my lap, heart pounding. She listened quietly as I explained. When I was done, she nodded slowly. "You've taken on more than most people could handle," she said, "and you've done it with grace. But it's time to think strategically." She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. "I have a research grant that needs an assistant. It pays better than your coffee shop job, and the hours are flexible. I was going to post it next week, but I'd rather offer it to you." I stared at her, stunned. "And Sophia?" she added, smiling softly. "You're not asking for charity, you've earned this. You're the most dedicated student I've had in years." Relief flooded through me. I took the position, and it changed everything. The work was challenging but rewarding. Survey analysis, case study reviews, data presentations. And with the better pay, I could finally quit the coffee shop. At the same time, I threw myself into rebuilding my business. I refined my offerings, targeting small family-run businesses that needed virtual help but couldn't afford full-time staff. Rachel noticed the change. "You're different lately," she said one evening as we shared takeout at our battered kitchen table. "Lighter, like you're finally catching your breath." I smiled, realizing she was right. There was still stress, plenty of it, but for the first time it felt like I was building a future, not just holding my life together with duct tape. Then, Dr. Ramirez handed me another opportunity. "The National Business Innovation Competition is open for entries," she said, sliding a flyer across her desk. "I think you should apply. Your model is unique and needed." I hesitated. The idea of competing on a national stage terrified me, but the thought of not trying terrified me more. So I said yes. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I'd known. I balanced research work, classes, my business, and now hours spent refining my competition proposal. Late nights turned into early mornings. I fell asleep with my laptop open more than once. But something had shifted. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about proving, to myself, if no one else, that I could do this. I thought about that every time the fear crept in, every time I worried I wasn't good enough, every time I saw Olivia's smiling face in a social media post, another reminder of the path that had been so easily handed to her. I wasn't bitter anymore. Not really. But I was determined, and slowly, my hard work started to pay off. The virtual assistant business grew. Clients recommended me to friends. I hired another student to help with basic tasks, freeing me to focus on strategy. I advanced through the early rounds of the competition, surprising even myself. Judges praised my creativity, my understanding of real world needs, my resilience. Through it all, Rachel cheered me on. Grandma Evelyn sent letters filled with encouragement. Dr. Ramirez guided me with steady wisdom. For the first time, I wasn't just getting by, I was building something real. But I also knew better than to think the road ahead would be easy. The biggest challenges were still to come. And deep down, I could feel the storm gathering again, one that would test everything I'd built so far. The call came late on a cold Thursday night, just as I was shutting down my laptop. I was exhausted. Too many hours spent polishing my business plan for the next round of the competition. Too little sleep. My phone buzzed on the desk. Olivia. I hesitated. We didn't talk much these days, not beyond polite texts or quick check-ins during holidays, but something about the timing, the urgency in the ringtone, made me answer. Olivia? I said, already bracing myself. Her voice cracked. Sophia, I don't know what to do. Can I come over, please? I barely had time to respond before she added, I'm outside. I didn't know where else to go. I threw on a jacket and raced down the stairs of my apartment. There she was, standing by her car in the dim glow of the street lamp, her hair in a messy bun, eyes red from crying. I hadn't seen her like this since we were kids. Without a word, I led her inside. She sank onto my couch, pulling her coat tighter around herself like armor. I waited, giving her space. Finally, she spoke. I'm failing, Sophia. My thesis is a disaster. My advisor says my methodology's a mess. I have 3 weeks to fix it or I won't graduate. I stared at her. Olivia, the golden child, the one who always had everything under control. She was falling apart. I didn't know where else to go, she repeated, her voice small. And in that moment, I realized something. All those years I'd envied her, resented her. She'd never really learned how to struggle, not like I had. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said, let's figure this out. That night marked the start of a new chapter for us. We stayed up late, spreading her research across my tiny kitchen table. I walked her through how to organize sources, how to structure her argument, how to build a plan and stick to it. At first, she was defensive, embarrassed, but slowly, as she saw progress, she softened. You're really good at this, she said one night, eyes wide with genuine admiration. How do you even know all this stuff? I hesitated, unsure how much to say. Because I had to figure it out. No one else was going to. She nodded, and I saw something shift in her expression, a kind of understanding that had never been there before. Night after night, we worked. I watched her gain confidence, watched the panic fade from her voice, and I watched us become sisters again, not the strangers we'd been for so long. Between helping Olivia, running my business, working for Dr. Ramirez, and keeping up with classes, I was stretched thin. But strangely, I didn't mind. There was something healing about it, about knowing I could be there for her, even when no one had been there for me. And Olivia, she changed. She stopped calling home for help with every small problem. She turned down expensive gifts from our parents, telling them she wanted to manage on her own. One evening, as we took a break from editing her draft, she looked at me and said quietly, I had no idea, Sophia. No idea how hard this has been for you. They always said you were doing fine, that you didn't need help. I smiled sadly. Fine is relative. She reached across the table and took my hand. I'm proud of you. I want you to know that. The words meant more than I expected. As the weeks passed, Olivia's thesis took shape. She found her footing, and I saw the sister I'd always hoped to know, kind, humble, determined. Meanwhile, my own path kept unfolding. The business innovation competition approached its final round. My small business had grown enough that I hired another student to help part-time. Dr. Ramirez continued to mentor me, pushing me to refine my pitch, to believe in the value of what I'd built. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was moving forward, with purpose, with hope. But I knew the hardest test was still ahead. Graduation. The day that would bring everything to light. The day that would force my parents to finally see me. Not as the daughter they overlooked, but as the woman I had become. and I wasn't sure if I was ready. But ready or not, it was coming. The weeks leading up to graduation passed in a blur of deadlines, sleepless nights, and moments of quiet determination. Between helping Olivia finalize her thesis and refining my own competition pitch, I barely had time to think about what it all meant. But deep down, I knew. Everything I'd worked for was building to this moment. The National Business Innovation Competition had become more than a challenge. It was a chance to prove, to myself and to everyone else, that I was more than the girl they'd dismissed. Dr. Ramirez pushed me harder than anyone ever had. We met every other evening in her office, going over my business plan, polishing my presentation, anticipating the judge's questions. There were nights I left her office drained, but filled with purpose. "You're not just a contender, Sophia," she said one night, her eyes steady. "You're a front runner. Believe it." My business had grown beyond what I thought possible. With the help of the 2 students I'd hired, I was now serving nearly a dozen clients, small, family-run shops that had come to rely on my services. Each new contract felt like another brick in the foundation I was building with my own hands. Meanwhile, Olivia's transformation continued. She didn't just finish her thesis, she fought for it, owned it. She turned down an expensive spring break trip our parents offered, choosing instead to stay on campus and work through revisions. And in quiet moments, she thanked me, not with grand gestures, but with genuine words that meant more than she realized. The day of the final competition arrived on a bright Saturday morning. I stood backstage at the convention center, clutching my note cards, trying to steady my breathing. I thought of every step that had brought me here. The long shifts at the coffee shop, the nights Rachel left food at my door, Grandma Evelyn's letters, Olivia's tearful knock that night. It all led to this. My name was called, and I stepped onto the stage, lights hot on my face, the room filled with faces, judges, professors, students, potential investors. I spoke with everything I had. I talked about my business, about why I started it, about the small companies that needed support but couldn't afford traditional solutions. I shared the numbers, the growth, the vision for what came next. And when I finished, there was a pause, a heartbeat of silence that felt like forever, before the room erupted in applause. Hours later, when the winners were announced, I almost didn't believe it when my name was called for first place. I stood frozen as the judges handed me the certificate, the check, the trophy. I'd done it. Against every odd, I'd done it. That night, I walked home alone, the city alive around me. I thought about calling Mom and Dad, about telling them what I'd achieved. But I didn't. Not yet. This was mine. A few days later, the university emailed me. I'd been chosen to give the student address at graduation. And not only that, President Andrews wanted to recognize my achievements publicly, beyond the speech. When I told Dr. Ramirez, she grinned. "Told you so." Olivia hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You deserve this, Sophia, more than anyone I know." Graduation week arrived like a storm. Our parents came to town full of plans for Olivia's celebration. They rented a big house, invited relatives, arranged catering. I received a last-minute, half-hearted invitation to the family dinner. "We assumed you'd be busy," Mom said when I asked. And I was, busy wrapping up client projects, preparing my speech, meeting with Dr. Ramirez for final advice. The night before the ceremony, Grandma Evelyn arrived. She brought with her a graduation stole she'd had made, simple, elegant, embroidered with the words, "Diamonds are made under pressure." When she placed it over my shoulders, I felt the weight of it and the truth in it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake thinking about the girl I'd been when I started this journey. The one who doubted, who longed for approval that would never come. And I thought about the woman I'd become, independent, strong, enough. Graduation morning dawned bright and warm. I dressed carefully, clipped the stole in place, and walked onto campus with my head high. Today wasn't about them. It was about me. And I was ready. The ceremony began under a wide, cloudless Texas sky. Rows of graduates in black gowns filled the quad, caps bobbing as we moved toward our seats. The air buzzed with excitement, with the chatter of proud families and the snap of cameras. I scanned the crowd and spotted them, Mom and Dad seated front and center, their faces glowing as they waved at Olivia. Beside them, Grandma Evelyn's calm, steady gaze found mine. She didn't wave or cheer. She just nodded, that small, powerful gesture that said, I see you. The speeches began, standard words about the future, about responsibility, about dreams. I heard them, but my heart raced ahead, counting down to my moment. When President Andrews stepped up to the podium again, clearing his throat, I knew it was time. And now, he said, his voice ringing through the quad, it is my honor to introduce our student speaker, a graduate of the business school, an entrepreneur, and a shining example of resilience. Please welcome Sophia Carter. There was a pause. I saw Mom and Dad turn to each other, confusion flickering across their faces. They hadn't expected this. I walked to the stage, the weight of my stole grounding me, the sun warm on my back. My hands shook at first, but as I looked out over the sea of faces, I found my voice. I came to Westlake determined to earn what wasn't given to me, I began. I worked 30 hours a week while taking a full course load. I built a business that now helps other small businesses succeed. And I stand here today not because the path was easy, but because I refused to let anyone else define my worth. I spoke of late nights, of lessons learned the hard way, of what it meant to find strength in yourself when no one else sees it. I didn't mention my parents by name, but my words told the story well enough. And as I spoke, I saw something shift in the crowd. Heads nodded. People leaned forward. My truth resonated. When I finished, the applause was louder than I could have imagined. As I stepped back, President Andrews returned to the mic. Sophia's achievements are remarkable, he said, and I'm thrilled to share that she has been offered a position at a leading consulting firm. She is also the winner of the National Business Innovation Competition and our business school's valedictorian. Gasps rippled through the audience. I dared a glance at my parents. Mom's face had gone pale. Dad's jaw was tight. His pride at Olivia now mingled with something else. Regret, maybe, or shame. Olivia, though, was on her feet, clapping, tears streaming down her face. But President Andrews wasn't done. In honor of Sophia's example, Westlake is establishing the Sophia Carter Resilience Scholarship to support students who, like her, demonstrate extraordinary determination. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. The sound washed over me, filling spaces I hadn't realized were empty. After the ceremony, I moved through waves of classmates and professors offering congratulations. When I reached my family, the tension was thick enough to cut. Dad spoke first, forcing a smile. Well, this is impressive. You really kept this under wraps, didn't you? I met his gaze, steady. I wasn't hiding anything. You just weren't looking? Olivia stepped in, looping an arm around my shoulders. Sophia's amazing, isn't she? Imagine what she could have done with the support I got. Her voice was kind, but the words hit hard. Mom opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Finally, she just said, We're proud of you, Sophia. Truly. I nodded, polite but unmoved. I didn't need it anymore. Their pride came too late to matter. That afternoon, I skipped their celebration dinner. Instead, I joined Grandma Evelyn, Rachel, Dr. Ramirez, and a few classmates who had stood by me from the start. We gathered at a small restaurant downtown, raising glasses of sweet tea and lemonade. This, I said, looking around at the people who had lifted me up, this is my real celebration. And as we laughed and shared stories, I felt something settle inside me, a peace I hadn't known I'd been chasing. I didn't need to earn my family's approval. I'd built something stronger, a future of my own making, and a family I chose. The next chapter was waiting, and I was ready to write it. The days after graduation felt like stepping into sunlight after years of storm. The applause, the scholarship, the job offer, all of it felt real in ways I hadn't dared to imagine when I first stepped onto campus, terrified and alone. But even as I celebrated, I knew the real work was only beginning. I spent the summer preparing for my new role at the consulting firm, but I didn't stop there. The prize money from the competition, along with my first few client payments, went straight into the foundation of something bigger. I worked with Westlake's Business School and Dr. Ramirez to formally launch the Sophia Carter Resilience Scholarship. I wanted students like me, kids who'd been overlooked or underestimated, to have a shot without sacrificing their health or dignity. Every week I met with Dr. Ramirez, and a small team of faculty to shape the scholarship criteria. We talked about financial need, yes, but also about character, drive, heart. I didn't want to hand out money to the kids who already had a dozen doors open. I wanted the ones who had fought for every inch. Rachel stayed by my side through it all. We moved into a small but bright apartment together near downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. In the evenings, we'd sit on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker on, and talk about the future. Rachel was finishing her degree, dreaming of law school. I cheered her on the way she'd done for me so many times. Olivia visited often that summer, too. Our relationship wasn't perfect. Too much history stood between us for that. But it was real. She asked questions about my work, sought advice on internships, and most importantly, listened. One evening, as we sat in the tiny kitchen of my new place, she said, "I used to think you were just lucky, but now I see you built this, and I'm proud of you." Those words mattered, maybe more than I wanted to admit. Mom and Dad kept their distance at first, unsure how to bridge the gap they'd created. When they called, I was polite, but the ache I'd carried for so long had faded. I no longer needed their validation. I'd found something stronger in myself. But time softens even the deepest wounds. Late that fall, they invited me to dinner. I almost said no, but something in Grandma Evelyn's voice when she encouraged me, "Sometimes grace changes people, Sophia," made me go. We met at a quiet restaurant. The meal was awkward at first, full of small talk and stilted compliments. But eventually, Dad cleared his throat, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "We owe you an apology," he said. "We failed you, Sophia, and we see that now." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "We were wrong about so much. We're sorry." I didn't know what to say. Forgiveness wasn't simple, and it wouldn't come all at once, but I nodded. That night didn't erase the past, but it opened a door to something new. Meanwhile, my consulting work flourished. I took on small businesses as side clients, mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself. The scholarship fund awarded its first recipients that spring. When I met them, kids with big dreams and bigger obstacles, I saw pieces of my own story in their eyes. And Grandma Evelyn, she remained my rock, my biggest champion. We talked every week. She kept her promise to always remind me of where I'd come from and where I was going. One warm evening, I found myself sitting at the edge of Ladybird Lake, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The city I'd once felt lost in now felt like home. I thought of that frightened girl who'd driven through the storm all those years ago, desperate and determined. She was still here, inside me, but stronger now. Whole. The road hadn't been easy. It never would be. But I'd built a life I was proud of. A life defined not by what others gave me, but by what I'd made for myself. And as the breeze carried the scent of the water and the hum of the city filled the air, I smiled, ready, truly ready, for whatever came next.